The executive floor smells like old money and a barely contained breakdown. That is my first impression when the elevator doors slide open, hitting me with a mix of expensive leather, heavy cologne, and something primal underneath it all. Then Joseph walks through the double doors. He has silver hair and a tailored suit that costs more than my car, but it is his dark eyes that really get me as they track my movement like I am the only thing in the room that matters. His vibration hits me first, an overwhelming physical pressure that screams for me to stay back, yet his eyes betray the act. He looks absolutely terrified of what he might do if I actually listen to that warning and walk away. I recognize the type immediately because he is an alpha shifter who has spent too long in isolation. He is clearly convinced that he is far too dangerous to love, and as I watch him, I can only think one thing: challenge accepted. The agency manager tried to warn me on my way out the door, telling me that nobody lasts more than 3 months with Joseph Vance.
Most assistants do not even make it 3 weeks.
But I just nod like I am listening to her, when I am really already moving on. His office is pure chaos when I walk in Monday morning, with files stacked in archaeological layers and a calendar scrawled on napkins tacked to the walls. Controlled fury radiates beneath all that tailored perfection, and the vibration in the room is suffocating, feeling like I am standing too close to a high-voltage transformer about to blow. I do not bother asking for permission before I just start reorganizing the wreckage of his professional life. By lunch, his desk is finally clear, and by 2 o'clock, I have moved his entire calendar into a digital format he can actually use. By 3, he is standing in the doorway, watching me, with pupils blown so wide I can see the darkness from across the room, and his hands tremble whenever he thinks I am looking elsewhere. On day 2, he decides to test my limits with impossible deadlines and last-minute changes that would break anyone else. He hands me a presentation due in 4 hours that should realistically take 3 days to finish, but I do not flinch or complain. I match his intensity with dry precision, delivering exactly what he needs while adding 3 strategic suggestions he had not even considered yet. He stares at my analysis like I have just rewritten a fundamental law of the universe, or like I found the structural flaw in his defenses and drew a giant circle around it in red ink. By day 3, the man starts seeking me out by walking past my desk 5 times an hour just to be near me. His hand lingers near my shoulder when he leans over to see my screen, and I can hear his breathing shift when I stand too close to him. That vibration of his is intensifying now, acting like a warning system that he cannot seem to shut off. His scent hits me every time he gets close, a heavy mix of sharp spiced rum, cold rain, and deep cedar wood. It completely bypasses my logic and goes straight for my primitive brain, making my knees want to wobble, but I refuse to let them give in. Then he retreats and slams his office door between us, likely reminding himself of some self-imposed rule he thinks he has to follow. I watch the pattern of his oscillation, seeing the way he desperately wants proximity while believing he has no right to have it. By Friday, I finally understand that he is not actually trying to intimidate me with his presence. He is trying to protect me from himself. And that realization changes the entire atmosphere of the office. The first time his hand actually touches me, the moment is entirely accidental, as we both reach for a file at the same time. His fingers brush mine, and the contact is electric, feeling like a literal static shock that travels up my arm. His vibration spikes instantly, and he jerks his hand back, as if the skin has been burned by the contact. He mutters a rough apology, but I tell him not to be sorry, and hold his gaze until he is the one who has to look away. By Thursday, he has started leaving small peace offerings on my desk, like a fresh coffee or a pastry from the shop downstairs. He leaves a note that just says, "Good work," in a slanted, aggressive handwriting, and I do not acknowledge the gifts out loud. I simply do my job better than anyone he has ever hired before, and I can tell he is noticing that too. Friday morning arrives, and he calls me into his office before the door closes firmly behind me. The vibration in the room feels different today, carrying less of a warning and more of a need wrapped in barbed wire. He tells me that I am not like the others, which sounds less like a compliment and more like a frustrated observation. I remind him that the others ran away while I am still standing here, and his jaw clenches tight as he tells me that I should probably run too. I tell him to make me, and that challenge hangs in the air between us like a living thing that neither of us can ignore. That is when I see the first real crack in his control. And it is not just the trembling hands or the dilated pupils this time. It is something much deeper, the sudden realization that I might actually be serious about staying, and the even scarier realization that he wants me to. He does not answer my challenge, choosing instead to stare at me like I am a complex problem he cannot quite solve. Then he nods once, a sharp and final movement, and dismisses me with a hand gesture that suggests we are finished for the day. But we are definitely not done. So I go back to my desk and finish the investor presentation he has been dreading all week. I add 3 slides he did not ask for and anticipate 6 questions he has not even thought of yet. When I email the final file to him at 4:57 p.m., he responds only a minute later with a simple thank you. Those are the only 2 words he sends, but when I leave at 5, I can see he is still sitting in his office. His vibration, which is usually a solid wall telling people to stay away, feels different as I walk toward the elevator. It feels like it is reaching out for me, asking me to stay, but I do not look back as the doors close. The big investor meeting is on Monday, and I am only just getting started with him. Drop a comment telling me where the pack is howling from tonight. Monday morning arrives with the kind of sterile, fluorescent dread only an investor meeting can provide. Joseph doesn't just enter the conference room, he occupies it, moving with a predatory grace that his expensive CEO tailoring can't quite hide. Today, his vibration is dialed down to a controlled professional hum, but I can still feel the static in the air as he takes his seat at the head of the table. I'm tucked away in the corner with my laptop, playing the part of the diligent assistant and recording every word. It's a bit of a mask for me too, considering I've already mentally dismantled and rebuilt his entire presentation 3 times this morning. Joseph starts in on the quarterly metrics, his voice smooth and authoritative as he navigates through revenue streams and market penetration. The investors are hooked, nodding along to the steady rhythm of his corporate persona until the atmosphere suddenly shifts. Marcus Chen, a junior executive who clearly values ambition over survival instincts, leans forward to interrupt. He doesn't just ask a question about the Asia-Pacific strategy. He actively challenges the foundation of the approach. He implies the numbers are soft and suggests the team missed something obvious. And for a second, the entire room goes bone dry. The change isn't about the temperature, but the atmospheric pressure in the room drops so fast it feels like the walls are closing in. Joseph's vibration darkens instantly, turning into something primal that bypasses logic and slams straight into the primitive brain. His hands grip the edge of the mahogany table until the wood actually groans, a sound so loud and jarring that everyone hears it, yet everyone collectively pretends they didn't. His rebuttal is sharp, devastatingly accurate, and delivered without him ever raising his voice. He dismantles Marcus's ego point by point, but the physical cost is written all over him in the way his jaw clenches and his pupils blow wide enough to swallow the light. When he finishes, the silence that follows isn't one of agreement, but the heavy, oppressive quiet that happens right before a lightning strike. The meeting breaks early because nobody wants to stay in the presence of power that's this barely leashed. Investors make vague excuses about their schedules, while executives check their phones, as if they've just remembered life or death appointments. Once the room clears, we head back to his office, but Joseph doesn't go for his desk. He stands by the window with his back to me, his shoulders rigid enough to snap. "You saw that," he says, and it isn't a question so much as a grim acknowledgement of the truth. I tell him I did, and when he asks if I know what he is, I don't look away when I give him my answer. He turns around then, and the CEO polish is completely gone, replaced by a raw, exposed alpha, whose vibration screams of danger and a desperate, starving kind of need. "I'm possessive," he admits, his voice dropping into a low, rough register that makes my pulse jump. He explains that he's dangerous and unable to share, and that once he claims someone, his nature won't let him let go. He steps closer until his vibration becomes a physical weight pressing against my skin, claiming that his isolation is actually an act of mercy. Isolation isn't noble, I tell him, meeting that dark, intense gaze without flinching. I call it what it really is: cowardice dressed up as protection, and the words land with the force of a physical slap. His pupils dilate even further as he takes another step, bringing the scent of sharp rum, cold rain, and cedarwood so close it overwhelms my senses. He warns me that if he lets me in, he won't be gentle, and he won't ever let me go, his voice vibrating deep in my chest. Instead of retreating, I step into his space, close enough to feel the startling amount of heat radiating off his body. I tell him I'm not afraid of him, but I am afraid of him never letting me choose, and I watch something deeper than his control crack behind his eyes. The realization that being truly understood might be worse than being feared seems to hit him all at once. He retreats, putting the heavy office door between us, and dismissing me with a voice so soft it feels more final than a shout. By Saturday morning, he's gone, trying to build walls he thinks are protective. But as I stare at his empty office, I realize I'm done letting him run. The charity gala is a masterclass in weaponized elegance, filled with crystal chandeliers and 300 people who smell like old money and quiet desperation. I'm wearing a simple black sheath dress that cost me a month's rent, and while it looks like it belongs here, my heels are already starting to murder my feet. I snag a glass of champagne from a passing tray and stake out a spot near the bar, scanning the crowd for any sign of Joseph. I don't have to look very hard because he arrives like a storm front moving through a clear sky. He's in a tuxedo tailored so perfectly it feels like a provocation, his silver hair swept back to emphasize the sharp, untouchable lines of his face. The crowd parts for him automatically, drawn to that massive aura of power until they get close enough to feel the edge of it and remember their place. His eyes find me from across the ballroom, and even from 30 feet away, I can see his pupils blow wide. That dark gaze locks onto me with the terrifying intensity of a predator spotting something worth the hunt, and the attention feels like a tangible weight on my skin. His vibration tracks me through the room, a low, rhythmic hum beneath the music that nobody else seems to notice but me. For 2 hours, he maintains a strategic distance, working the room with the practiced ease of a high-level executive. He shakes hands and makes the kind of small talk that costs an obscene amount of money, but his eyes never really leave me for long. Every time I look up, he's watching me, not with the subtle glance of a stranger, but with an open, possessive stare that makes the air feel thick. The peace breaks when a man with a predatory smile and the scent of cheap cologne approaches me at the bar. He leans in far too close, making a comment about my dress while his hand finds the small of my back, as if he has every right to be there. Before I can even react, the atmospheric pressure in the room shifts, and Joseph materializes from the crowd with impossible, silent grace. He replaces the stranger's hand with his own, but the feeling is entirely different. This is a physical claim. His fingers spread wide across the silk of my dress, his palm radiating enough heat to burn through the fabric and anchor me to the spot. "She's not available," he says, his voice dropping into that dangerous subterranean rumble that vibrates straight through my ribs. The other man retreats instantly, which is a smart move considering Joseph's vibration has darkened into something truly lethal. He doesn't release me, keeping that possessive grip on my back as he guides me away from the noise and down a long, quiet hallway lined with windows. The city view is spectacular, but I can't focus on the lights when I'm this aware of his fingers on my spine. The scent of him, cold rain, spiced rum, and deep wood, is overwhelming everything else in the corridor. We stop near the end of the hall, where the sounds of the gala fade into a distant, meaningless hum, leaving us alone in the charged air. He still hasn't let go, and when I turn to face him, I can see the strain in his jaw and the jagged rhythm of his breath. "I like the danger," I whisper, and the words seem to hit him with the force of a physical blow. His grip tightens, not to cause pain, but to keep himself grounded as his breathing hitches in the quiet space between us. For a second, he looks like he might actually shatter, breaking apart into something raw and completely uncontrolled right there on the carpet. Instead, he pulls me closer, one hand anchoring my back while the other cups my jaw with a gentleness that feels like a beautiful contradiction. The tension is no longer just about the physical space. It's something primal, like the heavy electric stillness that happens right before a massive storm breaks. He tells me I'm playing with things I don't understand, his voice barely more than a low growl against my skin. "Then teach me," I reply. leaning into his touch and letting the electricity of the contact move through every nerve in my body. His forehead drops to mine, and for the first time, he isn't trying to pull away or build a wall to keep me out. We're sharing the same narrow slice of air when the building's security system suddenly shorts out, plunging the hallway into darkness. The lights flicker and die, replaced only by the dim red glow of the emergency strips running along the floor. A mechanical voice echoes over the PA system, announcing a full security lockdown and telling everyone to stay exactly where they are. The realization hits me as the silence settles back in. We're trapped here, just the two of us, in an empty hallway until the morning comes. The emergency lights have kicked in, bathing the entire floor in a heavy, rhythmic red glow. Joseph's hand is still pressed firmly against my lower back, but the vibration coming off him has shifted from that raw, possessive heat into something sharper and more calculating. It feels like he's running through 1,000 different tactical scenarios in his head, his frustration rolling off him in waves that I can feel against my own skin. "We need to move," he says, his voice dropping into a low, gravelly tone that vibrates in the small space between us. He mentions that the executive suite has a private security line, which might still be functional, and he doesn't let go of me as we start to navigate the darkened hallway. His hand guides me with a constant, grounding pressure, acting like he can't stand the thought of me stumbling or losing my footing in the shadows without him there to catch me. We reach the executive floor after climbing another flight of stairs, but the heavy security door remains shut because his keycard won't register with the system down. He mutters something under his breath while checking his phone, but there's no signal to be found anywhere. The building was designed as a Faraday cage to prevent corporate espionage, which was a brilliant security feature until it turned the entire place into a 40-story prison. Now, we are the only two people left in this massive glass tower with no way out and no professional distance left to hide behind. I suggest heading to his office, and I can feel the internal war raging inside him as he hesitates. He clearly wants the proximity, yet he seems terrified of what he might do if he lets himself get too close to me in the dark. Finally, he gives a sharp, tight nod and leads me toward the door marked CEO, which swings open to reveal a massive room of glass and steel, overlooking the city lights 20 stories below. The atmosphere in here is different, saturated with a scent of sharp, spiced rum, cold rain, and deep cedar wood that seems to cling to every surface. Without the buffer of other employees or the hum of the office, his vibration intensifies until it feels like heat radiating from a furnace. I take a seat in the chair across from his desk while he paces back and forth near the windows, like a caged animal trapped in a $3,000 tuxedo. "Why do you really isolate yourself?" I ask, and I tell him not to give me that tired speech about being dangerous again. He stops mid-stride and turns toward me, looking spiritually exhausted for the first time since I've known him. It's as if he's been holding up the entire sky on his shoulders and just realized he could finally let it fall. He sits heavily in his chair, and the CEO armor he wears like a shield falls away completely, leaving just a man with dark eyes and a level of power he doesn't quite know how to handle. He admits there was someone before me whom he thought was his fated mate, and for 4 years he was possessive and demanding, to the point where he couldn't imagine her wanting anyone else. When she eventually left, he convinced himself that total isolation was the only answer. But he realizes now that it wasn't protection, so much as it was just cowardice with a better name. I listened to him without interrupting or trying to fix the situation, giving him the gift of someone who can sit in the darkness without needing to rush for the light switch. When I finally tell him he isn't that man anymore, he counters by saying he's still dangerous and likely to want too much. I stand up and walk around the desk, getting close enough to feel his vibration like a physical weight pressing against my chest. "Possessive isn't the same thing as controlling," I say, placing my hand directly over his heart to feel the steady thrum of his pulse. I tell him that guarding what matters isn't a flaw, but rather it's just love with teeth. Something breaks in his expression then, and he reaches for me with a desperate lack of restraint that I haven't seen before. His arms wrap around me like I'm the first breath of air he's had after drowning for years, and he buries his face in my hair, inhaling deeply, as if I'm the only thing keeping him alive. We spend the rest of the night talking about his fears and my certainty. exploring what it means to choose someone who has spent so much time warning you away. By the time the sun starts painting the glass walls in shades of gold, he has finally stopped fighting the inevitability of us. The security system chirps back to life at 6:47 a.m., and the door clicks unlocked. But neither of us makes a move to leave. He asks me to stay, and for the first time, it isn't a command from a boss, but a request from a man who finally knows where he belongs. Tuesday morning arrives with a literal storm outside and a figurative one walking through the front doors in a perfectly tailored suit. His name is Adrian Cross, the CEO of a rival firm who is a decade younger than Joseph and clearly hungry to claim some new territory. He walks into the partnership negotiations with a smirk that practically screams he thinks he's the only apex predator in the building. I feel his vibration the second he steps off the elevator, and it hits me like a cloud of cheap cologne that's trying way too hard to be aggressive. He scans the executive floor as if he's already calculating the square footage for a hostile takeover. But Joseph's hand finds the small of my back the moment Adrian appears. It isn't a subtle gesture. His fingers spread wide across my spine, and his vibration shifts into something so dark and protective, it would make a lesser man turn and run. The conference room feels like a battlefield, disguised with designer furniture and high-end water service. Adrian sits directly across from Joseph, but his eyes keep drifting back to me every time I speak or move to distribute the meeting agendas. His scent is all wrong. A mix of synthetic musk and manufactured dominance that feels entirely forced compared to the natural heat radiating from Joseph. When Joseph has to step out for a moment to take an urgent call, Adrian wastes no time making his move. He leans back in his leather chair and studies me like I'm a piece of high-end merchandise he's thinking about putting an offer on. He calls me an assistant with a deliberate, dismissive edge to his voice, but I don't even look up from my notes when I tell him I prefer the title of strategist. He lets out a low, predatory laugh and asks what it's like to work for a man who treats his staff like his own personal property. The door swings open before I can respond, and Joseph returns with a vibration so dark his pupils have blown wide until his eyes look like solid black ink. The atmospheric pressure in the room drops instantly, feeling like the heavy, charged air right before a massive lightning strike. Adrian smirks, clearly smelling blood in the water, and suggests that his assistant might be open to a better offer from a different firm. Joseph moves with a predatory grace that has no wasted motion, stepping forward with a fluid, lethal purpose that fills the entire room. His hand replaces mine on my back, but this time his fingers dig in slightly to anchor me firmly to his side in a public claim. "She's not available," he says, his voice dropping into that subterranean rumble that I can feel vibrating deep in my own chest. He tells Adrian that I am his, and he warns him that if he tests that boundary again, he'll find out exactly why Joseph is the one running this company. The younger alpha goes completely still as he realizes he's facing a predator far more dangerous than himself, and his vibration pulls back in a clear sign of surrender. The meeting wraps up quickly after that, with the partnership intact and the boundaries very clearly established for everyone involved. Later that afternoon, I confront Joseph in his office about how territorial and possessive he was being during the negotiation. He goes still, his hand dropping away as he prepares for me to reject him, but I hold up a hand to stop his retreat. I tell him that while I hated seeing him in pain, the way he claimed me actually felt like a form of safety I hadn't expected. His eyes search mine for any hint of a lie, but when he finds none, I tell him we need to have a real conversation about what his nature means. We end up establishing a firm boundary where possessiveness is allowed, but controlling behavior is strictly off the table. I explain to him that his nature doesn't need to be suppressed or denied. It just needs to be directed toward the right things. He agrees to the terms, and I can feel something finally settle between us. A mutual understanding that his darkness isn't a flaw I'm trying to fix. That night, he calls me into his office around 7 o'clock, looking slightly disheveled with a crooked tie after a long day of back-to-back meetings. I reach up without thinking to fix the knot for him, smoothing the silk down the center of his chest while my fingers linger against the fabric. He doesn't freeze or pull away this time. Instead, he covers my hand with his own and holds it firmly against his heart. The vibration beneath my palm is strong and steady now, and when he tells me I'm his, it sounds like a simple statement of fact that we both finally believe. The board meeting is set for Friday, and by Wednesday afternoon, I can see Joseph is already starting to fray at the edges. His breathing has turned shallow and tight. His knuckles stay white as he clenches his fists during conference calls. And that controlled vibration he usually wears like a suit of armor is crackling beneath his skin, like a live wire. It's a physical pressure that fills the room, making the air feel heavy and charged with a static that sets my own nerves on edge. I walk into his office at 4:30, closing the heavy door to shut out the rest of the corporate world, before sitting right beside him, instead of staying behind the safety of the desk. I look at him and keep my voice steady, telling him he needs to teach me how to help him through this. He keeps his gaze fixed on the window, his jaw tight as he mentions he's managed his nature alone for 10 years, without anyone's interference. That wasn't managing, I tell him, reaching out to bridge the gap between us. That was just surviving, and you don't have to carry the weight of this alone anymore. When he finally turns to look at me, the raw vulnerability in his eyes is absolutely devastating to witness. He warns me that I don't know what I'm asking for, but I don't flinch or look away. I simply tell him to show me, because I'm not going anywhere. He starts to explain the sensation like an engineer describing a faulty mechanism in a high-pressure system. When his vibration gets too intense, it's usually because he's suppressing something primal, like those possessive instincts and territorial urges that scream at him to claim what belongs to him. This constant suppression drains his energy, causing the vibration to build like steam in a sealed container until something eventually has to give. I ask him to show me what it feels like when he stops fighting it, and he hesitates for so long that I'm certain he's going to refuse. Then he gives a single, sharp nod and lets his ironclad control slip just a fraction. The change in the atmosphere is immediate and overwhelming. His vibration intensifies instantly, radiating outward from his body like heat pouring off a furnace in the middle of a cold room. It isn't threatening or scary. Instead, it's magnetic and intoxicating in a way that bypasses all my logic. It goes straight for my primitive brain, hitting that part of me that recognizes alpha energy and responds to it on a deep, cellular level. Instead of pulling back to safety, I move even closer until I can feel the heat of his breath against my skin. He warns me again that this is dangerous, and exactly what he was afraid would happen, his voice sounding strained and low. I take his hand and place it firmly on my chest, right over my heart, telling him I'm not afraid and asking him to teach me the rest. Something finally breaks in his expression, and the tension in his face softens into something new. He guides my hand to his own chest so I can feel the thrumming power there, then rests his other hand in my hair, whispering for me to just breathe with him. We spend the next hour developing a technique through simple trial and error. When his vibration starts to spike, the weight of my hand on his chest grounds him to the earth in a way that is literal and physical. At the same time, his hand in my hair anchors him in the present moment, keeping him from drifting into that predatory haze. Our breathing eventually synchronizes, falling into a slow, rhythmic pattern until our heartbeats align perfectly. I talk him down by acknowledging his nature, rather than trying to deny it exists. I tell him his vibration is a part of who he is, and that I choose all of him, even the parts that other people might find dangerous or intimidating. By the time Friday morning rolls around, he's learned a crucial lesson. Managing his nature doesn't mean he has to deny it. It just means having someone by his side who won't run away when the shadows show up. The board meeting feels like a war zone from the second we walk in. There are talk of quarterlies and market projections, followed by a sharp, hostile question from the CFO regarding the Asia-Pacific numbers. I watch Joseph's vibrations start to crack at the edges, and I can see his hands beginning to clench into fists on the mahogany table. I lean forward slightly and place my hand on his back, right between his shoulder blades where no one else can see. It's a subtle touch and a knowing glance, but it serves as a silent reminder that he isn't fighting this battle by himself. He takes a long, slow breath, his shoulders finally relaxing as the tension drains away. He answers the CFO's question with surgical precision and a calm that commands the room. and the moment passes without a single casualty. Afterward, back in the privacy of his office, he pulls me into his space and holds me close. He admits he couldn't have handled that room without me there, but I keep my hand on his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady and strong beneath my palm. I tell him he could have done it alone, but the point is that he doesn't have to anymore. Word travels fast in a building this size, and by Tuesday afternoon, it seems like everyone knows Joseph has officially claimed someone. The whispers start in the bathrooms and the break rooms, carried along on the steam of coffee machines and the hum of the copiers. People are saying I slept my way to the top, that I don't deserve my new position, and that I'm nothing more than his latest temporary plaything. I end up hearing it firsthand, from a bathroom stall, while two women from accounting talk at the sinks, their voices echoing sharply off the cold tile. They wonder how I've only been here 6 weeks and suddenly became indispensable to the man at the top. I flush the toilet and walk out to wash my hands, passing them without saying a word. And I watch their faces go pale in the mirror as they realize I heard everything. Joseph hears the whispers too, and his response is immediate, loud, and incredibly territorial. Within 48 hours, my promotion is made official, and I'm named the Senior Strategy Analyst with a corner office on the executive floor. The salary on the offer letter is high enough to make me stop and check the numbers twice, just to be sure I'm reading it right. He announces the move in the next board meeting, like he's daring anyone in the room to speak up or question his authority. His hand finds the small of my back as he says the words, a possessive touch that leaves absolutely no room for anyone to misinterpret our dynamic. Once the meeting breaks, I pull him into his office and shut the door firmly. I tell him I want to earn this position on my own merits, not just inherit it because of what we've become to each other. He goes very still, the kind of heavy stillness that usually comes right before a predator strikes. And for a second, I worry I've miscalculated. Then his expression shifts into something that looks a lot like respect, or even genuine admiration. "Then I'll teach you how to think like this," he says, his voice dropping an octave. "I won't coddle you or hand you the answers, but I will actually teach you the game." And he keeps his word. Over the following 3 weeks, Joseph becomes a mentor who pushes me harder than anyone else because he actually believes in what I can do. He challenges every single assumption I make and questions my logic at every turn, forcing me to defend my positions until I'm sweating through my silk blouse at 7 p.m. In our closed-door meetings, he is absolutely ruthless with my data analysis, and I make sure I match him point for point. The rest of the office starts to notice that I'm not in this seat because of proximity. I'm here because I'm the most competent person for the job. During a quarterly board meeting, one of the senior members leans back in his chair with a smug look on his face. He suggests that my judgment might be compromised by my personal relationship with Joseph, calling it a liability that the board needs to address. The temperature in the room feels like it drops 20 degrees in a heartbeat. Joseph tenses up beside me, his vibration darkening as he prepares to dismantle the man with surgical precision. I speak up before he can say a word, my voice sounding calm and clean as it cuts through the thick tension like a blade. I tell the board that my judgment is exactly the same as it was before, but the difference now is that I have someone who trusts me enough to tell me when I'm wrong. I explain that isn't a liability, but rather the entire point of having people around you who actually matter. The board member opens his mouth to argue, then thinks better of it and closes it again. Joseph is looking at me like I've just rewired his entire understanding of what a partnership is supposed to look like. It's as if I've shown him something he didn't even know was possible. The idea of being trusted with the truth instead of being managed and handled. Later, when we're back in his office, I notice his tie is slightly crooked from the tension of the afternoon. Without thinking about it, I reach up to fix it, adjusting the knot and smoothing the silk down the center of his chest. My fingers linger there for a moment too long. He asks me what I'm doing in a low, vibrating voice, and I tell him I'm taking care of him the way he's finally learning to let someone. He catches my wrist gently and pulls me into his personal space, his dark eyes searching mine for a long, silent moment. He admits he could get used to this feeling, and I whisper back that that's exactly the idea. He kisses me then, but it isn't the demanding, frantic way he did back on the roof. This is something slower and more cherishing, the kiss of a man learning that being claimed doesn't mean he has to lose his power. It means he gets to share it with someone else, and he's discovering that he really likes the way that feels. The clock on my desk says it is well past midnight on a Thursday when I finally decide to track him down. The executive floor feels hollow and tomb-like, draped in shadows except for the sliver of amber light spilling from his office door. That door is cracked open just a few inches, looking less like an entrance and more like a jagged, open wound in the dark. Every logical part of my brain tells me to turn around and walk toward the elevators, because I have been in this building since 7 a.m. My bed is a distant, beautiful dream, and my entire body feels heavy with a bone-deep exhaustion that caffeine can't touch. I push the door open anyway. Joseph is a silhouette behind his mahogany desk, sitting motionless in the dark while a single desk lamp carves sharp, unforgiving angles across his face. He is holding old photographs in his large hands, staring at the woman who came before me, the one he once believed was his fated match. I know I should probably back away and give him the privacy he deserves, but my feet won't move toward the exit. Respecting boundaries feels like a secondary concern when the air in the room is vibrating with a grief he usually keeps locked behind a titanium vault. I don't leave. Instead, I walk across the thick carpet and sink into the leather chair directly across from him, without asking for a single word of permission. I don't make an announcement or offer a greeting. I simply make myself a permanent fixture in his immediate personal space. He doesn't snap at me to get out, nor does he try to slide the photos into a drawer to hide his vulnerability. He just looks up at me with a gaze so heavy, it feels like he has been waiting for a witness to finally stumble into this wreckage. "That's her," he says, after a long silence, his voice sounding like gravel and rough disuse in the quiet of the empty skyscraper. He holds up a single print of a woman with dark hair who is caught mid-laugh at something happening just off camera. She has that effortless, radiant beauty that some people are just born with, the kind that doesn't require trying. 4 years, he tells me, his thumb grazing the edge of the paper. I spent 4 years convinced that we were fated to be together. He places the photograph back on the desk with a terrifying amount of care, acting as if the paper might shatter, or perhaps he might be the one to break. The real problem wasn't the fact that she walked out on me, he continues, his eyes tracking the dust motes dancing in the lamplight. The problem was that I actually understood exactly why she had to go. His natural possessiveness had been a dark shadow that eventually terrified her, and his constant need to claim her and mark his territory had become a cage. He thought he was protecting something rare and precious, but to her, it just felt like he was slowly suffocating the life out of her. After she left, I spent a long time convincing myself that total isolation was the only responsible answer, he admits. I figured if I never let another soul get close to me, I could never find a way to hurt them like that. He looks at me then, his pupils blown wide in the dim light, and the raw truth of his internal war is written all over his face. But that wasn't actually protection, was it? That was just cowardice, wrapped up in a much better-sounding name. I lean forward until my elbows are resting on the cool surface of his desk, forcing him to meet my stare. "You aren't that man anymore, Joseph." "I am still incredibly possessive," he counters, his voice dropping into a subterranean rumble that makes my skin prickle. "I am still dangerous, and I am still the kind of man who is likely to grip too hard and want far too much." "Yeah," I say, keeping my voice soft but steady as a heartbeat. But being possessive isn't the same thing as being controlling, because you only guard what actually matters to you. That isn't a character flaw. That is just what love looks like when it has teeth. Something visible breaks behind his expression, a jagged crack appearing in the stoic mask he has worn for so long, he likely forgot his own reflection. He stands up abruptly and reaches for me, his hands certain as they pull me around the desk and haul me upward. He sits back down and settles me firmly in his lap, his massive arms wrapping around me like heavy armor or iron prison bars. It is the only place that has ever felt like a real home, and I can feel the heat radiating off him in waves. He buries his face in the crook of my neck and breathes me in, taking deep, shuddering pulls of air as if I am oxygen and he has been drowning for a decade. "I don't deserve a single second of this," he mutters into the silence of the room. "Maybe you don't," I whisper back, my fingers tracing slow, rhythmic patterns across the expensive fabric covering his chest. But you are going to sit here and let me give it to you anyway. He pulls back just enough to capture my mouth in a kiss that is unexpectedly tender, lacking his usual demanding edge. It is an act of pure cherishing, his hand cupping my jaw like I am a fragile piece of glass he is finally learning how to handle. He seems afraid that his grip might crush me, but I can feel the moment he starts to trust that I won't break under his weight. When he finally pulls away, the look in his eyes has shifted into something settled and calm, as if he finally believes it might be okay to belong to someone. Later on, when the sun is up and we are back in the professional hum of his office, I notice his silk tie has gone crooked again. I reach up and fix the knot without even thinking about it, smoothing the fabric down the center of his broad chest while my fingers linger. This time, he doesn't freeze up or pull away from the contact. His hand covers mine, pinning it against his suit jacket so I can feel his heartbeat, steady and powerful, thrumming beneath my palm. "You're mine," he says, and it isn't a question or a desperate demand, but a simple statement of fact he has finally allowed himself to own. "Completely," I tell him, leaning into his touch until the rest of the world fades away. I walk out of his office around 11, but the thought of going back to my quiet apartment doesn't even cross my mind. The elevator hums as it carries me up to the roof access on the 42nd floor, and when the heavy door groans open, he is already standing there. Joseph is silhouetted against the skyline, his tuxedo jacket tossed carelessly onto the gravel-dusted concrete, while his white shirt sits untucked with the collar hanging open. The city of New York spreads out below us in a chaotic blur of neon lights and constant motion, filled with millions of people who have no clue what he really is. The wind up here is biting and cold, cutting straight through my thin silk blouse, but the atmosphere between us is charged with a heavy electric pressure. He doesn't ask me how I found him or tell me that I need to leave. He just gives a single, sharp nod, as if he had been expecting me to arrive. It feels like some primal part of him called out to me, and I simply followed the vibration until I reached the edge of the world. The silence on the roof is absolute, wrapping around us like a blissful, heavy blanket that shuts out the noise of the streets below. "There was someone else," he says finally, his voice sounding quiet and stripped of everything but a raw, bleeding honesty. It was years ago, and back then I was absolutely convinced that she was my fated mate. He truly believed she could handle the weight of his nature, the possessiveness, the bone-deep need to claim, and the total inability to share what he loves. When she finally walked away, he spent years convincing himself that his isolation was a form of mercy or a noble sacrifice. He thought he was protecting any woman foolish enough to get close to him, but he was really just building a fortress. But that wasn't an act of mercy, he says, turning his body to face me while the wind catches his dark hair. It was pure cowardice, because I was only protecting myself from the agony of ever losing someone like that again. He takes a step toward me, his vibration controlled but massive, radiating a leashed power that makes the very air hum with tension. Then you walked into my office and changed the gravity of my world, and I realized I've been lying to myself every single day. Isolation isn't a noble calling. It is just a slow way to die alone. "I need you to understand what you're getting into," he says, his voice stripped bare of any professional polish. "If I actually let you in, I won't be gentle about it, and I certainly won't share you or let you go." He reaches out and takes my hand, pressing it firmly against the center of his chest so I can feel his heart hammering like a trapped animal. My nature doesn't have a volume knob, and being possessive isn't a flaw I am trying to fix. It is simply the core of what I am. I step into his space until I can feel the heat radiating off his skin, smelling the sharp spiced rum and cold rain that always clings to him. There is something darker underneath it now, a mix of jagged fear and a desperate, clawing hope that he can't quite hide. "I'm not afraid of your nature," I tell him, keeping my voice steady even as the wind tries to whip the words away. "I'm only afraid of you never letting me make the choice for myself, and there's a massive difference between those two things." "That isn't exactly a reassurance," he mutters, his eyes searching mine. "I know it isn't," I say, leaning into his touch and the physical weight of his presence against my skin. I'm not here to offer you comfort. I'm here to tell you that I know exactly what I am choosing, and I am choosing you anyway. His hand trembles just a fraction as he cups my face, and I realize that beneath all that iron control, he is absolutely terrified. He isn't scared of hurting me. He is scared of being loved enough that I could utterly destroy him just by leaving. Then he kisses me. It isn't a soft or tentative gesture, but a collision that tastes like surrender and total possession, as if he is finally exhaling after holding his breath for a lifetime. His other hand slides to the small of my back and pulls me flush against his frame, sending a jolt of pure electricity through every nerve in my body. His mouth is demanding and hungry, and I meet him with the same intensity, because this isn't a moment for gentleness. This is the primal second where a predator stops fighting his own soul and accepts the hunger he has tried to starve out. When he finally pulls back, he rests his forehead against mine, his breathing ragged and uneven in the cold night air. "I'm still a dangerous man," he whispers. "Yeah," I breathe against his lips, "and I've always liked the danger." He lets out a sound that is half groan and half laugh before pulling me back into the safety of his arms. He buries his face in my hair and breathes me in like I am the first lungful of clean air he has tasted since he was a boy. Below us, the city lights don't illuminate a thing, and above us, the sky is a vast, infinite stretch of darkness. Between us, something has shifted and settled into a permanent shape that can never be undone, no matter what happens next. By tomorrow morning, everyone in the city will know the truth. Nothing is ever going to be the same again. By Tuesday morning, the secret is dead. The whispers start in the bathrooms and break rooms, drifting through the office like coffee steam and the ozone heat of the photocopiers. I'm washing my hands in the restroom when I hear two women from accounting, their voices bouncing off the cold tile as they wonder how I became indispensable in just 6 weeks. I don't hide. I simply dry my hands and walk past them without saying a word, watching their faces go pale in the mirror. Joseph hears the rumors too, but instead of retreating, his response is immediate and aggressively territorial. Within 48 hours, my promotion is official, and I'm moving into a corner office on the executive floor as a senior strategy analyst. When I see the new salary, I have to stop and check the numbers twice, just to make sure my eyes aren't playing tricks on me. He announces the move at the next board meeting, his voice steady, as if he's daring anyone in the room to question his logic. His hand finds the small of my back while he speaks, a possessive touch that leaves absolutely no room for interpretation. Once the room clears, I pull him into his private office and shut the door firmly behind us. I tell him directly that I want to earn this position rather than inheriting it because of what we've become to each other. Joseph goes completely still, the kind of heavy silence that usually comes right before a predator decides to strike. For a heartbeat, I wonder if I finally miscalculated. But then his expression shifts into something that looks like genuine respect. He tells me he won't coddle me or hand me decisions, promising instead to actually teach me how to think at this level. He keeps that promise over the next 3 weeks, becoming a mentor who pushes me harder because he actually believes in what I can do. He challenges every single assumption I bring to the table and questions my logic until I'm sweating through my silk blouse at 7 p.m. In our closed-door sessions, he is ruthless with my analysis, yet I find myself matching him point for point until the rest of the office starts to notice. They realize I'm not in that corner office because of proximity, but because I'm the most competent person for the job. The tension peaks during a quarterly board meeting when a senior member leans back, suggesting my judgment is a liability because of my personal relationship with Joseph. The temperature in the room feels like it drops 20 degrees in a second, and I can feel Joseph tensing beside me as his vibration darkens. He's clearly preparing to dismantle the man with surgical precision, but I decide to speak first. My voice is calm and clean, cutting through the thick atmosphere like a sharpened blade. I tell the board that my judgment hasn't changed at all, but the difference now is that I have someone who trusts me enough to tell me when I'm wrong. That isn't a liability. It's the entire point of surrounding yourself with people who actually matter. The board member starts to speak, then thinks better of it and shuts his mouth. Joseph is looking at me like I've just rewired his entire understanding of what a partnership is supposed to look like. It's as if I've shown him that he can be trusted with the truth, instead of being managed by people afraid of his shadow. Later that evening, I notice his tie is crooked from the sheer tension of the day, so I reach up to fix it without a second thought. I adjust the knot and smooth the silk down the center of his chest, letting my fingers linger against the heat of his skin. When he asks what I'm doing in that low, gravelly voice, I tell him I'm taking care of him, the way he's finally learning to let someone. He catches my wrist and pulls me into his space, his dark eyes searching mine with an intensity that makes my knees weak. He admits he could get used to this, and I whisper back that such is the entire idea. He kisses me then, but it isn't the demanding fire from the roof. It's slower and more cherishing. He's a man discovering that being claimed doesn't mean he's losing his power, but rather that he's finally found someone strong enough to share it. Later that night, I find myself straightening the papers on his desk, a new habit of bringing a little order to his beautiful chaos. My fingers sort through the files automatically, while my mind replays the board meeting and the way Joseph looked at me when I stood my ground. I notice his tie is still slightly off, so I reach out to fix the knot with practiced fingers. As I smooth the fabric down his chest, I can feel the steady, heavy thrum of his heart beating against my palm. He goes perfectly still, his breathing hitching as if the simple touch has short-circuited his brain. He asks what I'm doing in a voice that sounds rough and unpolished, and I simply tell him I'm taking care of him. He catches my wrist with a gentle grip and pulls me flush against him, his eyes searching for something in me that I can't quite name yet. When he says he could get used to this, I whisper that he's supposed to. The kiss that follows is slow and deep, a silent request instead of a command, and that sudden vulnerability undoes me more than any display of dominance ever could. As I eventually turn to leave the office, he catches my hand and asks me to stay, his voice lacking any of its usual sharp authority. We spend the rest of the evening just talking, moving from his fears of breaking me to my own fears of never being enough for a man like him. He pulls me into his lap and tucks my head under his chin, telling me I'm not just enough, but that I'm actually everything to him. We eventually fall asleep right there, tangled together in his oversized office chair while the city lights glow like embers through the glass walls. His vibration is a steady, comforting hum against my cheek that doesn't feel like danger anymore. It feels like coming home. By the time the sun comes up, the entire office will probably know we spent the night here, and the whispers are going to get much louder. People will draw their own cheap conclusions and try to reduce what we have to something transactional. But honestly, we won't care. We've moved far beyond the point of hiding or letting other people's discomfort dictate how we live our lives. The morning sun hits the glass and turns the entire room to gold, and I feel Joseph stir beneath me as his arms tighten in a protective reflex. I press my face into the crook of his neck and breathe in the scent of spiced rum, cold rain, and deep cedarwood. Underneath all of that is something new and soft that smells exactly like trust. The real danger was never his possessiveness or his power, but the terrifying risk of being known completely and choosing to stay anyway. We're both staying. 3 weeks have bled into a month, and the heavy, electric atmosphere in the building has finally started to settle into something new. Joseph and Amy aren't the office scandal anymore, because they've simply become a fact of life that everyone has accepted. He hasn't lost that possessive edge, and you can still see his hand instinctively finding the small of her back during long meetings. His vibration still darkens the second another man speaks to her, but it doesn't feel like a cage anymore. It feels like a shield. Amy hasn't changed either, remaining just as independent as the day she walked in, and she still spends her afternoons challenging his strategies and standing her ground in the boardroom. The junior executive who tried to call Joseph out weeks ago eventually wanders over to her desk one afternoon with his head down. He offers a quiet apology for the scene in the board meeting, admitting he didn't really understand the dynamics at play between them. Amy accepts it gracefully and moves on, but Joseph is watching the whole exchange from his office doorway with a flicker of dark satisfaction. He sees that she's entirely his, yet completely capable of handling herself without needing a rescue. And that specific combination is intoxicating to a man like him. That evening, he takes her to a restaurant overlooking the city for their first real date in public as a couple. This isn't some stiff business event where they have to perform, so they're just existing as themselves while the city lights hum below. People definitely recognize him, and a trail of whispers follows them all the way to their table. But Joseph couldn't care less about the gossip. He orders the wine and reaches across the white linen to take her hand, his eyes locking onto hers with a sudden, quiet intensity. "Are you happy?" he asks, and the weight of the question hangs in the air between them. Amy takes a second to really think about it, looking back at how much her life has flipped in just 30 days. A month ago, she was just a temp filing papers in a dusty basement, and now she's a senior strategist with a corner office and a man who looks at her like she's the only thing that matters in the world. "Yeah," she says, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I'm happy. Are you?" Joseph doesn't say a word at first. He just lifts her hand to his mouth and brushes a kiss against her knuckles. "I'm happier than I ever thought was possible," he admits, and the honesty in his voice vibrates right through her. The bubble bursts the next morning when an email from corporate lands in her inbox regarding a massive promotion in Singapore. It's the kind of move that would launch her career trajectory into the stratosphere, but it also means she'd have to leave everything behind for at least 6 months. She stares at the screen for a long time before she finally works up the nerve to tell Joseph, fully expecting him to demand that she stay. Instead, he just looks at her and asks what she wants, putting the power entirely in her hands. She wants that promotion more than anything, but the thought of being without him for half a year feels like a physical ache. "So take the job," he says firmly, "and I'll just come with you, because I can run this entire company from anywhere on the planet." Amy just stares at him, her brain trying to process the sacrifice he's offering. "You'd actually leave? You'd walk away from the company you spent your entire life building?" "I built this place to prove I wasn't weak, and that I didn't need anyone," he says, his voice dropping to a low rumble. "But I was wrong about all of it, because you aren't a weakness, Amy. You're the only thing that actually matters to me." In the end, she turns down the Singapore offer and negotiates a different promotion at the home office instead. She gets the same title and the same career path, but she gets to keep him too, because she's realized that having someone doesn't mean you have to sacrifice your identity. It just means you're building something much bigger than you ever could have managed on your own. That night, she finds herself fixing his tie again, a small ritual of care that they've claimed in the middle of all the corporate chaos. Joseph catches her wrist, pulling her flush against his chest until she can feel the heat radiating off him. "I love you," he says, and it's the very first time those words have left his lips. She doesn't even have to think about it before she answers. "I love you too." In that moment, all the danger he warned her about feels completely irrelevant. The real danger was never his temper or his power, but the terrifying risk of a real connection. It's the vulnerability of being known completely, flaws and all, and having the other person decide to stay anyway. The danger was never Joseph. It was always the risk of opening up and letting someone see the parts of you that you keep hidden. He's still an alpha. He's still incredibly possessive. And he's still a dangerous man to cross. But now he belongs to her, and she's finally brave enough to keep him right where he is. He's learned the hardest lesson of all, that being loved by someone fierce enough to see the truth and choose you anyway isn't a weakness. It's the only thing that ever mattered.